Welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be diving deep into the science of consciousness.
That's a big one.
It is a big one. And specifically, how does this thing even emerge? We're going to be looking at excerpts from Antonio Damasio's book, Self Comes to Mind.
Okay.
And I think this will be really interesting because a lot of times when we think about consciousness, we think about, airy-fairy philosophy.
Right.
But this is really rooted in how the brain works, how biology works.
Yeah, and I think Damasio does a really good job of kind of just cutting through to the actual mechanics of it.
Yeah. So he actually starts off tackling a misconception that I think a lot of us we grow up with.
Okay.
Which is this idea that the mind is separate from the body.
Yeah, like it's some kind of ethereal being just floating around in there.
Right, exactly. And he kind of flips the script on that.
He does.
And says that, no, consciousness isn't separate. It's actually created by these physical processes in the brain.
Yeah, I really like the analogy he uses. He talks about how we observe our minds kind of looking inwards while our bodies are looking outwards. And I think that split perspective that we have can make them feel very distinct.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
When in reality, they're very much integrated and intertwined.
So then the question is, if it's not this separate thing, then how does the brain actually go about building this thing we call consciousness?
Right?
And, from an evolutionary perspective, why even bother?
Well, Damasio believes that consciousness really evolved as a survival mechanism.
Okay.
He kind of describes it as this mental simulator.
Interesting.
Where you can actually play out different scenarios in your head before you act in the real world.
So it gives you an advantage.
Exactly. It's a huge advantage for survival.
So instead of just reacting to things, you're able to imagine different outcomes.
You can think about, what if I do this? Or what will that person do if I do this?
Right, especially as you start getting into more complex social situations and decision-making.
Exactly. And as our ancestors faced increasingly complex environments, being able to think through those things was probably a big factor in who survived and who didn't.
So it's really tied to our evolutionary success.
Yeah, it's not just a fun little bonus. It's very core to who we are.
So how does the brain actually do this simulating? Does it follow a blueprint or, what's going on there?
Well, Damasio uses this term mapping to describe the brain's process of making sense of the world and itself.
Okay.
And he talks about how the brain creates these maps of your body and the world around you.
It's like an internal GPS.
It is. It's like an internal GPS for both your physical self and your surroundings.
Wow. And are these maps just static pictures, or are they?
They're not static at all. They're actively being built and updated all the time by areas like the hippocampus and the parietal cortex.
So you're adding information as you experience new things.
Exactly. And these maps are actually experienced as images and feelings in your mind.
So the maps themselves are part of what creates consciousness.
That's right. He says they become the very building blocks of consciousness. Imagine a brain without these maps.
Oh, wow.
Its reactions would be really basic, almost robotic.
Right. It'd just be, stimulus response, stimulus response.
Yeah, exactly.
You wouldn't have that kind of internal model of the world to work with.
And it's those maps that allow for this really flexible behavior and thought that we take for granted.
Okay, so you mentioned feelings being part of these maps.
Yes.
Are we talking emotions here, or is this something else?
Well, you're picking up on something really crucial here. Before emotions even come into play, there's this thing that Damasio calls the proto-self.
The proto-self.
A proto-self. And this is like a foundational layer in the brain that's primarily located in the brainstem.
Okay.
And it basically maps the body's basic physical structure.
So before we even have thoughts and emotions, the brain is building this sense of our body existing in the world.
It is.
That's pretty wild.
It's not about thinking or feeling in the way that we typically imagine, but it's about this primal sense of being.
Oh, okay.
And from this proto-self, we get what are called felt body images.
Felt body images.
Yes, and these are the most basic, primordial feelings that ultimately form the basis of all other feelings.
So it's like the foundation of a house. You can't build anything on top without it.
Exactly.
So the proto-self lays the groundwork for everything else.
Exactly.
Okay. So how do we get from this basic sense of being to actually interacting with the world? How does that proto-self actually connect to the outside?
Well, the key is how the proto-self reacts to changes that are caused by the outside world.
Okay.
And this is where what he calls the core self comes in.
The core self.
Let's use an example.
Okay.
Imagine you're at the beach and you see a flock of pelicans flying overhead.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I can see it now.
That visual stimulus interacts with your protoself and triggers a sense of knowing and ownership of the experience. That feeling of this is happening to me, that's the core self at work.
So it's like I'm not just seeing pelicans.
Right.
I'm having the experience of seeing pelicans. And my
Exactly.
brain is making sure that I know it's me having it.
Exactly. And the core self is constantly placing you at the center of the experience, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly.
Oh, interesting.
And it's at this point that emotions really enter the scene.
Okay, so we've got this core self, this sense of me experiencing the world, and then how do emotions build on that?
So emotions are definitely created by the brain, but they're very much intertwined with the body.
Okay,
Think of them as these programs that get triggered by events and that cause changes in your physical state.
okay,
Like a really good example is the fear response.
right.
You know, your heart races, your muscles tense up, even your breathing
Like
changes.
the whole body gets involved.
Yeah, it's this really powerful chain reaction involving areas like the amygdala, the brainstem, and of course the body itself.
So the event triggers the emotion, and the emotion triggers this bodily reaction. But where do feelings come in?
So feelings actually arise from the brain in interpreting and experiencing those bodily changes.
Oh, okay.
So you see a bear, you feel fear, your body reacts, and then you feel the effects of that reaction, that pounding heart, the tense muscles. Damasio is saying that the proto-self and the core self are essential in connecting those bodily changes to your conscious awareness.
So my heart doesn't just race when I'm afraid. I become aware of that racing. And that awareness becomes part of what it means to feel afraid.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's not just the event, it's your body's reaction to the event that makes it real in your mind.
That's a whole loop.
It is. It's a loop. And this whole interplay between the brain and the body is really what gives rise to this rich tapestry of our emotional lives.
That's pretty fascinating. So we've gone from this proto-self to this core self, this kind of sense of me experiencing things,
Mm.
to emotions layered on top of that.
You're right.
And that's all setting the stage for, I guess, the next level of self.
Yeah. Exactly. The autobiographical self.
Ah, yes. The story of me.
Exactly.
How does that come about?
So the autobiographical self is built upon the core self, and it adds this sense of personal history, identity, and the ability to imagine your future.
Okay.
And what's fascinating about this is that it can operate both consciously and unconsciously.
Oh, wow.
It weaves together your memories and shapes your sense of who you are in these really complex ways.
So we're not just experiencing the world in the moment. Our brain is also weaving this story about us as we go.
Exactly. It's a dynamic process.
It's giving me a whole new appreciation for just how complex this thing we call the self really is.
Yeah, and your memories, for example, aren't just these static files. They're
Mhm.
actively being shaped and reshaped by your emotions, your experiences, and even unconscious processes.
So every time I recall a memory, I might be rewriting it a little bit.
Exactly. It can be colored by your current state of mind.
It's like that whole thing about how our memories of events can change over time.
Right.
Like my childhood, the story I tell myself about my childhood isn't necessarily the exact truth.
Right.
It's been filtered through, years of me thinking about it and experiencing other things.
Yeah, that's the autobiographical self at work.
That's fascinating. So we've got this whole system going on, this proto-self, the core self, emotions, and then this autobiographical self.
It's all happening in the brain.
It's all happening in the brain. But I mean, how does the brain coordinate this incredible symphony of activity? It seems impossibly complex.
It does, doesn't it? And it's not like there's a little conductor in there waving a baton.
Right.
But Damasio does point to these specific regions in the brain that kind of act like conductors.
Oh,
They orchestrate this whole process.
Interesting.
One area he talks about is the thalamus.
Okay.
And this acts as a kind of relay station, filtering and distributing sensory information to different parts of the brain.
So it's like Grand Central Station.
It is, making
Yeah.
sure all the trains are going to the right place.
That's a great analogy. And what about the other conductors? What other areas are involved?
So he also points to a region called the posteromedial cortices.
Posteromedial cortices. I'm going to have to write that one down.
Yeah, it's a mouthful. BMCs for short.
EMCs. Okay, and what do those do?
Well, his research suggests that they might be crucial for creating our sense of self.
Okay, so different parts of the brain specialize in different aspects of consciousness.
Right.
And then they all have to work together to create this unified experience.
Exactly. You can think of it as this network of specialized zones that are constantly communicating and exchanging information.
So it's like a web of connections with signals flashing back and forth.
Yeah, and these zones are sometimes called convergence-divergence zones
Convergence, divergence zone.
because they integrate information from different senses, memories, and emotions, and then send those signals out to other areas of the brain.
Okay, so it's like a constant process of integration and distribution.
Exactly.
That's amazing. I mean, it's a wonder that it all works so smoothly. But if consciousness is rooted in these biological processes, why does it feel like it fluctuates so much?
Right.
I mean, we go from being laser focused on something to daydreaming to, sleeping. How does Damasio explain those shifts?
Well, that's where the concept of a gliding cursor comes in.
Gliding cursor. Okay, tell me more.
So he proposes that consciousness isn't just this on-off switch.
Okay.
It's more like a dimmer switch.
Oh, interesting.
It exists on a spectrum of intensity and scope, and it's constantly adjusting based on your needs and what you're doing.
Okay, so
Uh,
when I'm really focused on something,
yeah.
like my consciousness narrows and intensifies, but when I'm relaxed, it kind of expands and takes in more information.
Exactly, like a spotlight versus a floodlight.
I like that. That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
So different states of consciousness like sleeping, dreaming, even just being engrossed in a task, those all represent different points on that spectrum.
Exactly. Your focus shifts, the intensity changes, but it's all still consciousness, just
Yeah.
operating in different modes.
It's like we have this whole control panel for our consciousness, and we're constantly adjusting the settings depending on what we need.
Yeah.
I never thought of it that way. This deep dive is already changing how I think about my own mind.
It's fascinating stuff, isn't it?
It really is. But, we've talked a lot about the conscious mind. Where does the unconscious fit into all of this?
Oh, the unconscious. It's so much more than just this hidden basement full of repressed desires as some people think.
Right.
Damasio really emphasizes the importance of what he calls the cognitive unconscious.
The cognitive unconscious.
Okay. And this is where things like learned skills, habits, even moral behaviors are stored and carried out.
Wow, so the unconscious isn't just this dark, scary place. It's actually running a lot of the show, keeping us functioning efficiently.
Precisely. Think about something like, walking home on autopilot or playing a snare on the piano without thinking about each individual note.
You just do it.
You just do it. Those actions are being guided by the unconscious, and it frees up your conscious mind for these more complex tasks.
It's like having a whole team of experts working behind the scenes.
It is.
And it's making me realize that even the things I take for granted,
Yeah.
the things I do automatically,
Right.
those are actually incredibly complex processes happening in my brain without me even realizing it.
Exactly.
There's a whole other world in there. So if so much is happening unconsciously, then how much control do we really have?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah. Are we really the ones steering, or are we just passengers?
Well, Damasio recognizes the importance of conscious deliberation.
Okay.
This ability to plan, make decisions, actively shape your life.
So we're not completely powerless.
No, not at all. But he also acknowledges that those conscious choices,
Yeah.
they're informed by and sometimes even limited by unconscious forces.
Oh, like biases that we might not even be aware of.
Exactly.
So it's not that we don't have free will,
Right.
but it's not as simple as we might think.
Exactly. And I think recognizing that complexity can be empowering.
Okay.
It allows us to understand the interplay between our conscious intentions and our unconscious biases.
And hopefully make better decisions as a result.
Exactly.
Wow, this is blowing my mind. We've gone from the building blocks of the self to the role of the unconscious.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. And this idea that we might not be as in control as we think.
Yeah, it really challenges our assumptions, doesn't it?
It does. And I think, one of the things that's so interesting about Damasio's work is that it's not just about studying the brain in isolation.
Right.
It's about understanding how these brain processes, both conscious and unconscious, actually impact our lives
And our interactions with each other.
and our interactions with each other.
And with the world.
Exactly. So maybe we should take a little breather here, let all this sink in.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
And then we can come back and delve into some of the other fascinating things that Damasio talks about, like the brain's internal maps.
Oh, yes, those are fascinating.
Okay, we'll be right back after a quick break.
Sounds good.
So, we've established that the unconscious is doing a lot more than we might realize.
It really is.
But you mentioned earlier that it even influences our moral judgments.
It does.
How does that work?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting because Damasio challenges this idea that morality is purely a product of conscious reasoning.
Okay.
He believes that a lot of it is actually rooted in the unconscious and influenced by our emotions, our social experiences, and even our biology.
So it's not just about, sitting down and thinking through, what's right and wrong.
Right.
Our gut feelings about these things are actually coming from somewhere deeper.
Yeah, think about it this way. Have you ever been in a situation where you instantly felt that something was wrong,
Oh, yeah.
but you couldn't really articulate why?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, I just knew it wasn't right,
Yeah.
even before I could, explain it.
Exactly. That's your unconscious moral sense at work. It's drawing on this complex web of past experiences, emotional associations, and even things like mirror neurons,
Mirror neurons.
which allow us to actually feel what others are
So
feeling.
my brain is, taking in all this information,
Yeah.
processing it unconsciously,
Yeah.
and then giving me this, gut feeling about whether something's right or wrong.
It's more than just a gut feeling, though.
Yeah.
It can actually influence your behavior, leading you to act in ways that align with those unconscious moral judgments.
Wow. So morality isn't just about these, abstract principles. It's actually, deeply embodied
Yeah.
in our biology and shaped by our own unique experiences.
It is.
That's a really fascinating perspective. Kind of makes you rethink, how we approach questions of justice and responsibility.
It does.
So instead of just punishing people for wrongdoing, we also need to consider, this whole complex interplay of factors that led to those actions.
Right. It's about understanding the whole person, their background, their experiences, and the unconscious forces that might be influencing their behavior.
It's like Damasio is pushing us toward this more, I don't know, nuanced and compassionate view of human nature.
Yeah, it's not black and white. It's about understanding the shades of gray.
And that understanding can actually, help us create a more just and equitable society, right?
Exactly. If we recognize the power of the unconscious, we can start to address those biases and create systems that are fairer for everyone.
Right. It's really interesting how his work bridges this gap between neuroscience and these social issues.
It is.
It's not just about, studying the brain in isolation.
Right.
It's about understanding how these brain processes actually impact, our lives and our interactions with each other.
Absolutely. And he doesn't stop there.
Oh.
He actually goes on to explore how consciousness has shaped our cultural evolution,
Okay.
looking at things like the development of language, art, and social institutions.
Wow. So he's going from the individual brain to the evolution of society as a whole.
He argues that these cultural developments are actually products of our conscious minds.
That's a big claim.
Yeah, well, think about, the power of language to communicate ideas,
Yeah.
art to express emotions,
Okay.
social institutions to organize ourselves.
Right.
These are all manifestations of our conscious capacity for creativity and cooperation.
So we took this amazing biological ability, this consciousness, and then use it to create these incredible systems of meaning and connection.
Exactly. And those systems, in turn, shape our individual consciousness.
Oh wow, it's a loop.
It is. It's a beautiful feedback loop.
Okay, I have to admit my brain is starting to feel a little full.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
We've gone from the building blocks of the self to the evolution of culture.
Right.
It's incredible how Damasio weaves together all these different threads into this grand tapestry of human experience.
Mhm. He's a master at synthesizing complex information and presenting it in a way that's both insightful and engaging.
Well, before we move on, I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier.
Okay.
You mentioned that conscious deliberation actually has its limitations.
It does.
And you gave that example of buying a car.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So, when you're making a complex decision like that, you might think that, carefully weighing all the pros and cons, that's the best approach. But sometimes our unconscious minds can actually process that information more efficiently.
Wait, so you're saying that sometimes going with your gut feeling is actually the smarter choice?
It can be, especially when you're dealing with a lot of variables.
Okay.
Your unconscious mind has access to this vast storehouse of experiences, memories, and emotional associations that your conscious mind might not even be aware of.
Okay.
And all of that can be integrated to form this gut feeling that's actually surprisingly accurate.
So it's not about ignoring logic or reason,
Right.
but recognizing that our conscious minds have limits.
Right.
And sometimes trusting our intuition that that unconscious wisdom can actually lead to better outcomes
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between conscious deliberation and an unconscious intuition.
and using both to our advantage.
Exactly.
It's making me think about all those times I've agonized over a decision,
Yeah.
only to, like, end up going with my gut feeling anyway.
Right.
Maybe my unconscious was trying to tell me something all along.
It's certainly possible.
And I think that's, one of the key takeaways from Damasio's work.
Yeah.
It's not about dismissing conscious thought. It's about recognizing the power of both conscious and unconscious process,
They work together.
the collaboration.
Yeah.
This whole idea of the unconscious playing such a big role in our lives,
Yeah.
even in our morality. It really makes you question those traditional ideas of free will and responsibility, doesn't it?
Yeah. It does. And that's why Damasio's work is so thought-provoking.
Yeah.
It challenges us to look beyond those kind of simplistic explanations and to embrace the complexity of human nature.
It's like he's giving us this new lens to view ourselves and the world,
Yeah.
one that recognizes the profound influence of the unconscious on everything we do and think.
And that new lens can help us to be more understanding, more compassionate, and even more creative.
So speaking of creativity,
Yeah.
I'm curious, how does Damasio see the role of consciousness in shaping our future selves?
Right.
We've talked about, the past, the present,
Right.
but what about, like, our potential?
Well, Damasio believes that consciousness is actually the key to unlocking our full potential.
Okay.
It's through conscious reflection, planning, and goal setting that we can create the lives we want and contribute to a better world.
So we're not just these passive passengers
Right.
on this journey of life.
Yeah.
We're actively shaping the direction we want to go.
Yeah. Exactly. And the autobiographical self,
Yeah.
that story we create about ourselves, plays a crucial role in this process.
Yeah.
By understanding our past, our values, our aspirations, we can make more informed choices about the future.
It's like we're the authors of our own lives, and consciousness is the pen.
I like that.
And it's through conscious awareness that we can, reflect on our experiences, learn from our mistakes, and make choices that align with our deepest values.
It's an ongoing process.
Yes, it's a lifelong journey of discovery and growth.
Exactly. And consciousness is the compass that guides us along the way.
I've always struggled with this idea of finding my true self.
Okay.
Like, there's this, like, fixed version of me out there somewhere, and I just need to, uncover it.
Right.
But listening to you talk about Damasio's work,
Yeah.
it makes me think that maybe it's not about, like, finding a true self, but about creating one.
That's a really profound insight, and I think it aligns with Damasio's view of the self as this dynamic process. There's no fixed endpoint, no final destination. It's about embracing the journey of becoming, allowing ourselves to evolve over time.
That's a much more liberating way to think about it.
It is.
It's not about, like, searching for some predetermined identity.
Right.
It's about actively shaping who we want to be.
Exactly. And that shaping process is informed by our conscious choices, our reflections on our experiences, and our interactions with the world around us.
It's a reminder that we have agency.
Yeah.
Even amidst the constraints of our biology.
We're not just products of our genes and our experiences.
We're active participants in creating our own selves.
And that's a really hopeful and empowering message.
It is. It
Yeah.
suggests that we have the power to create a better future, both for ourselves and for the world.
It does.
But, all this talk about the self,
Yeah.
it can make it seem very, like, internal.
Right.
Very focused on our own individual experience. But Damasio also emphasizes that our brains are actually wired for connection, for empathy.
Yes.
So we're not just these, like, isolated minds trying to figure things out on our own.
Not at all. Damasio believes that our ability to connect with others, to understand their experiences and share their emotions is a fundamental aspect of consciousness.
So how does the brain do that? Is there, like, an empathy center or something?
Well, it's not quite that simple.
Okay.
It's more about this complex interplay of different brain regions, including the mirror neuron system we talked about earlier.
Ah, yes. The mirror neurons, those were fascinating.
Yeah, this allows us to simulate the actions and emotions of others.
So wait, when I see someone smile, my brain is actually, like, mimicking that smile internally.
In a way, yes.
Wow.
Those mirror neurons fire as if you were smiling yourself, which helps you to understand the meaning of the other person's smile and share their feeling of happiness.
That's incredible. It's like we're literally wired for empathy.
We are.
Our brains are built to connect with each other on this really deep level.
Yeah, and those connections are essential for our well-being, both individually and as a society.
Yeah.
Damasio argues that our capacity for empathy is what allows us to build strong relationships, cooperate effectively, and create a more compassionate and just world.
This is really making me rethink how I view my interactions with others.
Yeah.
It's not just about exchanging, words or ideas.
Mhm.
It's about sharing emotions, understanding each other's experiences,
Mm.
and connecting on this deeper level.
Exactly. And those deeper connections can be incredibly rewarding. They can bring us
Yeah.
joy, support, and this sense of belonging.
It's making me realize how important it is to cultivate those connections,
Yes.
to be present with others,
Right.
and to really listen to what they're feeling and experiencing.
And to be open to sharing our own experiences and vulnerabilities as well.
Yeah.
It's through those acts of sharing and vulnerability that we truly connect with each other.
This is really resonating with me. It's like Damasio is giving us this roadmap for living more consciously
Yeah,
and more compassionately.
absolutely.
It's not just about understanding the brain.
Right.
It's about using that knowledge to create a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
And to contribute to a world where empathy and understanding are the guiding principles.
That's a beautiful vision.
It is.
And it makes me even more curious about the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier that Damasio also talks about the brain's internal maps.
Yeah, those maps are fascinating.
What exactly are those?
Okay.
And how do they relate to consciousness?
So Damasio uses these maps to explain how our brains make sense of both the external world and our internal bodily states.
Okay.
They're basically representations of reality that our brains are creating and updating constantly.
So it's like having this miniature universe inside our heads.
It is. It's like a personalized atlas for the world and your own body.
But are these maps just visual?
That's a great question. They're not just visual, they actually incorporate information from all of our senses.
Okay.
Sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and even our sense of touch and our internal bodily sensations.
Wow, so they're like multi-sensory representations of the world.
Exactly.
And are a place in it.
Exactly. And these maps are constantly evolving, being updated with each new experience we have.
That's a lot of data.
It is.
Our poor brains,
They never stop working.
just these maps, they allow us to navigate our surroundings, to make sense of what we're perceiving,
Right.
even to predict what might happen next.
Exactly.
This is making me realize how much work our brains are doing behind the scenes.
It is.
We take these abilities for granted,
We do.
but they're actually incredibly complex processes.
They are. It's a testament to the incredible power and plasticity of the human brain.
Okay, I'm eager to learn more about these maps and how they contribute to our conscious experience.
All right, let's dive in.
All right, let's talk about these brain maps. I mean, it's mind-blowing to think that our brains are creating these internal representations of everything.
It really is like having this personalized atlas for the world and your own body.
Yeah, like a miniature universe inside our heads. But are those maps just visual? Like, are they just pictures?
Well, that's a great question. They're not just visual. They actually incorporate information from all of our senses.
Oh, wow.
Sights, sounds, smells, tastes,
Okay.
even our sense of touch and our internal bodily sensations.
So they're like these multisensory representations of the world, our place in it.
Exactly. And what's really amazing is that these maps are constantly evolving,
Okay.
being updated with each new experience we have.
So they're not static.
No, they're very dynamic. They allow us to navigate our surroundings,
Okay.
make sense of what we're perceiving, even to predict what might happen next.
I mean, imagine if we didn't have those maps. Like, our world would just be this constant barrage of random sensory information.
It would be chaotic and unpredictable.
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to function.
Exactly. And that's, it makes me think about how differently we all experience the world.
Oh, yeah.
Like my bakery map might be completely different from yours
Yeah.
based on, my personal experiences, my preferences.
It's like we're each carrying around these personalized living maps.
Yes.
that are constantly being updated and refined.
Exactly. And those maps they're crucial for building our sense of self.
Okay.
Damasio emphasizes how the proto-self, that basic sense of being,
Right.
relies on maps of the body.
Oh, okay.
Think about feeling your heartbeat
Yeah.
or the sensation of your lungs expanding.
Yeah.
Those feelings mapped by the brain, they contribute to that fundamental sense of me existing.
So the body maps are like the foundation. Yeah.
Of the self.
It's like the bedrock. Wow. It's making me realize that being embodied,
Yeah.
like having these physical sensations is actually crucial for our conscious experience.
It really is. And, it challenges that classic notion of the mind being separate from the body.
Right. Yeah.
Damasio's work shows how deeply interconnected they are.
It really does. And I think, emotions are a great example of that.
They are.
It's like when I feel scared, it's not just a thought in my head.
Right.
It's my brain interpreting my racing heart, my tense muscles, all those physical changes that happen in response to a threat.
Precisely. And, those bodily maps are also crucial for empathy.
Oh,
Remember the mirror neuron system we were talking about?
yes.
It allows our brains to simulate the actions and emotions of others.
Right.
And that simulation often involves mapping those actions and emotions onto our own bodies.
So when I see someone in pain,
Yeah.
my brain might activate some of the same neural pathways that would fire if I was experiencing pain.
Yeah, it's possible. That shared mapping is what allows us to understand and share the emotions of others.
To feel empathy and connect with them on a deeper level.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see how all these concepts we've been discussing,
Yeah.
the proto-self, the maps, the emotions, the social connections,
Yes.
they're all like pieces of the same puzzle.
They are, yeah.
They all contribute to creating this incredibly rich and complex experience of being conscious.
It's a beautiful tapestry, isn't it?
It really is. And the more we explore these ideas, the more we appreciate the intricate workings of our own minds.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It really is. I got to say, this deep dive has been a real eye-opener.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
I feel like I'm seeing my own mind and the minds of others in a whole new light.
That's the power of exploring these big ideas.
Yeah.
They challenge our assumptions and expand our understanding of what it means to be human.
And they inspire us to keep learning and exploring. This is definitely just the beginning of my journey into the world of consciousness.
Well, remember, the journey of exploring consciousness is a lifelong adventure.
It is.
There's always more to discover,
Yeah.
more to learn,
Yeah.
and more to wonder about.
Well, as we wrap up our deep dive today,
Oh, okay.
I want to thank you for sharing your insights and for guiding us through this incredible exploration.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listener, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into how consciousness emerges.
Yeah, it's a complex topic.
Yeah.
But hopefully you now have a better understanding of how your brain creates the feeling of being you.
And remember, your brain is constantly constructing and updating its maps of the world and your body,
Yes.
shaping your emotions,
Yeah.
and creating the narrative of your life.
It's a dynamic and
Yeah.
ongoing process.
And it's a journey worth paying attention to. So, as you go about your day, take a moment to appreciate the incredible symphony of activity happening inside your own head.
Yeah, be curious about your own experiences.
Be open to new perspectives
And keep exploring.
and keep exploring the fascinating world of consciousness.
It's a wild ride.
Until next time.